is Harlem up on the top, and Queens and the Bronx, and all those areas of New York City are drinking the same drinking water, but something is affecting the poor communities. And what we found out from baby teeth and the state milk boards after Chernobyl is that the state milk boards are shipping the most contaminated milk and dairy products from reactors around dairies, from dairies near nuclear reactors. And the government is shipping all that contaminated milk into inner city black communities, and it goes into the mom and pop grocery stores.
I believe
Yes.
It seems like you're attributing diabetes to specifically radiation poisoning. But I mean, what about processed foods, sugars, all these things?
Those are chemicals.
After the 50s.
Those are chemicals.
Right.
And that's the cover story. Because ionizing radiation is 10 to 100 million times more damaging to developing embryos than the strongest chemical. There are cofactors and there's synergistic effects where the chemicals and the radiation together multiply the effects of each other. For instance, Navajo uranium miners who did not smoke had lower lung cancer rates than Navajo uranium miners who smoked. Because you know what the tobacco is full of? It's full of chemicals.
And radon. Commercial cigarettes.
Well, polonium, uranium, because phosphate fertilizers are loaded with uranium. Phosphate is mined to extract uranium, and they only get 15% of the uranium out of the phosphate. 85% goes in the fertilizer bag. And we have planes flying all over Europe and all over the United States and Canada spraying uranium-contaminated phosphate fertilizers all over all our crops, our farmland, contaminating the runoff and the drinking water, and the animals are all eating it too. So uranium is absolutely everywhere.
Chemtrails.
And chemtrails.
Do they contain these ingredients?
The chemtrails, I'll talk about them in a minute. They have chemicals, but they also have ionizing radioactive materials in them. But those are part of the HAARP system, which is a global weapon of mass destruction, which was developed, co-developed by the Soviet Union and the Livermore and Los Alamos labs. And that was developed to weaponize nature and to use the energies released from natural events as weapons of war, weapons of mass destruction. And the Fukushima earthquake was triggered by HAARP at Gakona, Alaska, by the U.S. Navy.
What was that?
I'm sorry, you can't take a nap while I'm talking. No, that was a big whopper. The earthquake at Fukushima was triggered by the HAARP weapon of mass destruction system. It's a huge antenna array that operates at over 1 billion megawatts, and it's transmitted through the sky and bounced off of the chemtrails, which are electromagnetic mirrors in the sky. So they can transmit it from Alaska all the way around the world by just bouncing it off those mirrors. Oh, well, let me finish this, and then we'll talk about HAARP. So here is the diabetes rates in the United States. The highest ones, the lowest area is in the Rockies. And the highest rates of diabetes are along the Gulf Coast states because the uranium from the wars here is picked up and included in hurricanes all hurricanes in the Atlantic originate in the Sahara Desert in Africa, where you have very hot days and very cold nights, and those extreme temperatures cause very, very powerful mixing of hot and cold air, and that incorporates the uranium dust and carries it right across the Atlantic into the Gulf region, and then it gets rained out here. And that's why we have the highest diabetes rates there, as well as in Puerto Rico, because the United States and British governments carried out depleted uranium bombing of Vieques Island in Puerto Rico since 1947. And depleted uranium, by the way, was proposed for development as a radioactive poison gas weapon under the Manhattan Project in 1943. They didn't know if the nuclear bombs would work, but they said we can make a radioactive poison gas that will contaminate all of the terrain. It will kill our soldiers if they're contaminated, as well as enemy soldiers. It's a permanent terrain contaminant because the half-life of depleted uranium is 4.5 billion years, the age of the Earth, and it takes 10 half-lives for a small amount of radiation to diminish to an insignificant amount. But 45 billion years from now, there will still be a lot of uranium in the Earth. However, the whole universe is only 16 billion years, so I don't know how we're going to wait that long.
Leuren, are they still testing with depleted uranium off the coast of the Northwest here? Do you know anything about
yes,
that?
Congressman McDermott, Jim McDermott, I worked a lot with him. He's a congressman from the Seattle area of Washington, D.C., and he's a medical doctor. And I had a lot of communications with him because the Navy is shipping out depleted uranium weapons to all of the theaters of war from Washington State, from Seattle. And the Navy ships all of the ammunition to the Coast Guard. They accidentally shipped depleted uranium bullets to the Coast Guard in Washington State, and the Coast Guard opened the crates and said, "We don't want this stuff." And they went to McDermott. He started an investigation. The citizens helped, and he was able to absolutely stop depleted uranium use by the Navy in Washington State coastal waters. So all they did was just sail up the coast to Vancouver and British Columbia, and they're using it there all over the place. Does anyone have any questions about this map? This is how mapping disease links disease to the environment and the cause of the disease.
I have a question. So if
Yeah.
you say that Hanford Reservation is leaking the stuff into the Columbia River, why?
They're dumping it. They're dumping it.
Why is the diabetes rate in Oregon are not high?
Huh?
Why the diabetes rates in Oregon are not that high?
Oh,
Or
because
in Washington? I mean, if there is
Well-
a nuclear contamination, Oregon and Washington border is so high, why are diabetes rates so low?
they're getting more radiation in the south, in the southern states. But look at North America compared to all other countries in the world.
We got the heaviest.
The whole country is nuked, and Fukushima just nuked it again, 10 times worse than Chernobyl. And when you see what we look like 20 years from now, it's going to be horrifying. What? Well, the whole west coast of North America is completely contaminated with radiation now. You too. Come here. I've got my Geiger counter. Stick your tongue out.
So yes, I have a question. So if there is a contamination, radioactive contamination in the water, how can I determine it?
How can they determine it?
How can I determine it?
You?
Yeah.
Oh, you have
More
to,
into
no, you have to have a laboratory to do that. You need a mass spectrometer. You need very sophisticated and very expensive equipment to measure radiation in water. You can use a Geiger counter. I have a Geiger counter which detects disintegrating atoms, decaying atoms, but it doesn't tell you what volume of air, so you don't know the concentration, and it doesn't identify the isotopes. You need mass spectrometers or other scintillation counters or other very, very expensive earthquake equipment to do that. And the EPA, by the way, and the Canadian government said there's no danger to radiation. No, the Fukushima, it's just tiny amounts. And 24 of the 124 monitoring stations that the EPA operates were broken, they said. But I talk to European scientists almost every day, and they sent me the German and the Norwegian data, and they measured it and reported it accurately because they are set up to monitor for atmospheric and underground nuclear weapons tests. It's part of the Non-Proliferation Treaty surveillance. So they can practically measure every single atom. And they reported it by altitude up to 10 kilometers, and they reported, well, they had maps, animated maps, 3 days at a time, where you could watch the plumes actually moving and where they were coming. And we really got hammered in Seattle and the coast of California. But it also contaminated Mexico, and then they did weather modification. Most of it came across the United States from west to east, and there was a high pressure area that they created with HARP over eastern Canada, and it included Los Angeles, New York, and Washington, D.C. So those were protected areas. Now, I think Obama should have taken all of us with him, but he took his wife and 2 children to the southern hemisphere for 3 weeks while we got nuked. And the public health departments in Sonoma County and Santa Clara County and every other county in California issued a letter to all medical doctors in each county on March the 17th, the day before the radiation arrived from the first explosion at Fukushima. And they said to all the medical doctors, do not give iodine tablets to patients who are concerned about exposure to radiation. They stopped measuring radiation in milk. They measured radiation in milk all through Chernobyl and for a year afterwards. So if you don't think by now that this government is not deliberately genociding the American people, then I have more evidence. For the skeptics. Now I'm going to show you autism. You think it's mercury in vaccines, huh? This is Washington State. This is where the highest precipitation is, rainfall and snow in Washington State. And this is where the